Have you ever thought about how amazing the human body is? King David sure did. In Psalm 139, he reflects and says, "I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made." David knew his Creator and that his body was a masterpiece. Well, so is yours. God's affection for you is so profound that He created everyone, everywhere, uniquely in His own image. Discover the amazing details and the many miracles that have to take place in each step of the process of fetal development, all the way to birth. Coming up on today's edition of Origins, Created in God's Image, Part 1. Hello and welcome to Origins. I'm Ray Heipel. It's an honor to be your host today. We have a very interesting program for you, Created in God's Image, Part 1. And we've got Amanda here in the guest chair with us. She was the host of a recent Origins special, Fearfully and Wonderfully Made. Amanda, tell us more about this program.
Sure. Well, in Part 1, we're going to take a closer look at how each of us are conceived, carried to term, and enter this world. Being a mother of 4, I can certainly appreciate learning more about what was actually going on during my pregnancies. Much of that you'll see today about the miracle of birth was compiled over time by the late renowned anatomist Dr. David Menton.
Yes, these segments were taped several years before Dr. Menton's passing. Now let's go to the Creation Museum with the help of Origins host emeritus Dr. Don Chapman, and find out more about the miraculous process of childbirth.
Now today we're going to talk about fearfully and wonderfully made, and you're talking about the human body, I assume.
Oh yes, and you know, Psalm 139, that's where we got that title, Fearfully and Wonderfully Made, and one has only to look at this beautiful baby behind me to be convinced that we have a marvelous Creator.
When we start talking about babies, the question everyone wants to ask is, when does life begin?
Well, here's a little baby that's beginning pretty early, and this baby has the same question you do, Don. When does life begin? The interesting thing is everything's alive in the womb. The womb's alive, the egg cell's alive, the sperm cells are alive. The issue really isn't when does life itself begin, but when does a human life, or more accurately, when does a person begin in the womb? Well, the person began, the humans began back in Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5. We read about where Ecclesiastes is talking about the prophet Jeremiah, and he says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you. I ordained you a prophet to the nations." So Jeremiah was known personally to God, even before the worlds were formed, as indeed we are. Now, of course, we can't go there. That's too profound for us. But when we look in the womb, there is a point where we can say, this is a new human being from this point on.
Well, I'm anxious to hear that.
We can also look at the Psalms where we learn that where I got the title, Psalm 139. Here we read, "For you created my inmost being," speaking of God, of course, "you knit me together in my mother's womb." And that's an interesting word, knit, there, because you see, my field of study was called histology. And that comes from a Greek word histos. It means a web or a fabric. You're probably wondering, what are medical students doing studying webs and fabrics? That's the name given to looking through a microscope at, for example, a human body. And why would they call that the study of webs and fabrics? Everything looks woven under the microscope. Collagen fibers in the dermis are woven, cardiac muscle fibers are woven. And here we are in Psalm 139, and the psalmist says, "You knit me together in my mother's womb, and I praise you." Why? Because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, and I know that full well. Well, let's look at some of the science involved here. The picture we're seeing here is a illustration of the lower pelvic area of a female showing the uterus. The uterus is a small muscular structure, and it's held in position by a couple of broad ligaments on both sides of the uterus. And then we have some little round ligaments up here that hold the ovaries. Now, the ovaries are on either side of the uterus. And to give you an idea of size here, think of an almond nut without the shell. Okay, that's the size of an ovary. So if we had a microscope slide with an ovary section, we could hold it at arm's length and see the ovary, size of an almond nut. And you have two of them, left and right, and they produce the eggs. And you know when a baby girl's born, she has every egg she's ever going to have in her whole life.
Is that right?
About 500,000.
Wow.
Apparently the Lord figured 500,000 kids would be enough for anyone.
I think that would do it.
So anyway, about 450,000 to 500,000 eggs are in place when the baby girl's born. And then when she gets to be about 12, 13 years old, they reach a point of maturation where they can then be fertilized. And about once every 28 days, if she were regular, an egg would be ejected from either the right or the left ovary. Now, they tend to be courteous. One month, the other the next month, back and forth. But if you ruin one of the ovaries, if it's removed surgically or if it's defective, the remaining ovary has the considerable good sense to go ahead and ovulate every month.
Yeah, wow.
Isn't it just the wisdom of the body? Now, when these eggs are ovulated, they are ejected into this tube you see coming out of either side of the uterus called the oviduct. Just means the egg tube. Sometimes we call it the fallopian tube. And it ends in a funnel right here. And that funnel gets right down on that ovary surface and feels around for where's this egg coming out, and parks there and catches that egg when it is ejected from the surface. This is the ovary. Remember, again, we're talking about the size of an almond nut here. Occasionally, a couple eggs can be ovulated, and then you have the opportunity for twins. And the egg is just this big cell right here in the side.
Okay.
That will be ejected right through the wall of this Graafian follicle where the funnel will catch it. You're probably wondering, well, what about all these other cells around here? This isn't the egg around the periphery here. Those follicular cells will go on to develop into an endocrine gland. And it's shown in yellow down here, different stages of development. And that endocrine gland makes progesterone and other chemicals which make the uterine wall be ready to receive the baby should fertilization occur. Now, if fertilization doesn't occur, a signal's given, shut down the plant. This one isn't working for us. And the yellow body breaks down and it forms a scar. And here you can see an example of one of the scars over here. And every 28 days you get another scar. This is the only place in the body I know of where scars are completely dissolved.
That's amazing. The intricacy of this is just astounding to me.
Well, let's look at a cutaway now of the whole reproductive apparatus in the lady. This is the uterus over on the left side here, and you can see the oviduct has been opened. You can see the funnel on the end here, and an egg will be ejected and go right in about the first third of that funnel. Okay. And that's where fertilization will typically take place. It's about a week trip from here all the way down, and it'll implant right here in the dorsal wall of the uterus, just like a seed in the soil. But what moves the fertilized egg down the oviduct? This is a photograph of the cells that make up the wall of the oviduct. You can see its nucleus. And on top are a bunch of little hairs up here. And unlike hair, these little things actually whip and move, and not like an oar, like a whip, like this. Huh. And it's the movement of the cilia that propel the fertilized egg down the oviduct. It's called the wave.
Do that at Pirate Games.
Yeah,
okay.
It's called the wave. And here you can see it beating. If you ever try to participate, it takes a lot of coordination to get this going for a whole group. Right. Imagine the whole oviduct, millions of cilia all beating in a metacronal rhythm and propelling the ovum down the oviduct. Here is an actual section across an oviduct. And then notice around the egg here, we have an accumulation of cells, cumulus oophorus. The cumulus oophorus secretes a sticky material that the cilia can get a grip on when they move the egg down the oviduct.
The little hairs don't just slide across there.
That's right.
But it makes it sticky so it moves them.
Well, we have a higher magnification of that egg, and here are the chromosomes for the egg right in this little area here. When a sperm cell and egg cell get together, if they each had the full number of chromosomes, 46, okay, now you'd have 92. And then the next generation of life, you'd have double that, the next double that. So It's very important. Before the egg is ovulated, it begins a process called meiosis. What happens is the DNA is duplicated once, but it divides twice.
Wow.
That cuts your chromosome number down to half, so that when the egg and sperm get together, you're back to your full complement of chromosomes and on your way.
I mean, this screams design to me. Somebody made this and made it work. To think that this happened by random chance or by coincidence is unbelievable to me.
People suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Boy, it's one thing not to know the truth, but boy, it's a whole different situation when people at least have some sense of the truth, that there is a creator, and then they suppress that truth.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow, so much incredible information. Amanda, did anything in particular stand out to you that you would want to comment on?
It did. Well, that opening question of, when does life begin? I think that is the question that hinges on a lot of things, a lot of decisions made in our world. But when that opening image that he showed us of after conception, and it looked like material that was woven, and literally God has knit us in our mother's womb, But then when they said about my ovaries are the size of almonds, and that when I, as a baby girl, was born, I was born with all the eggs from my lifetime. It is amazing to see God's creation. It truly is awesome.
And how one ovary, if it's missing, the other one will pick up the slack.
Yes.
It knows to do that. It is. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. Now let's go back to Dr. Menton to discover the amazing details of when a human life truly begins.
We're here in Legacy Hall at the Creation Museum, and I'm talking to Dr. David Menton, my dear friend, and he is sharing with us the amazing story of the human birth process.
Okay, well, you'll recall we had the egg.
Right.
And it had been ejected into the oviduct, about the first third. And we see that in the photograph here. This is about 12 to 24 hours after ovulation. And the egg is sitting here, and this is where it'll be fertilized. And typically it'll be fertilized anywhere from about 12 to 24 hours. But it could be fertilized as much as 5 days later. Yeah. When the sperm first arrive, they're not able to fertilize an egg. They have to be exposed to certain chemicals in the oviduct and in the uterus that will capacitate them. Wow. Without capacitation, no fertilization would ever occur. And these are the smallest cells in the human body. They're just nothing but a nucleus and a tail to push them along. 150 million sperm cells to try to find one egg. Out of 150 million, maybe a dozen or perhaps 2 dozen will actually find the way. Now, they do have a heat sensing mechanism when they're some distance away to know roughly how to move in the direction of the egg. And as they get closer, there's a chemical attraction. When they're really close, that last dozen or so will kind of swim in a figure 8 pattern until one of them touches this egg. And its first barrier is out here. Here's a sperm that's arrived, and it has all that sticky stuff around the egg. Remember that, the cumulus? It takes a special enzyme to digest its way through the cumulus, okay? Without that enzyme, forget about it, it's all over. That's close, we could have lost it there. Now it's down to the red layer, that's the zona pellucida. And there isn't any sperm getting through the zona pellucida unless it has a special enzyme called acrocin, which is stored in a little cap in front of the nucleus, and that breaks open and specifically digests its way right through this zona pellucida. Now when it gets down to the egg cell membrane, there's a quick chemical inventory that's done. The egg basically says, are you really a sperm cell? And are you of the same species? All of this biochemical testing is done. This is done in nanoseconds. And then when that happens, a cortical reaction occurs that toughens up the whole membrane. Well, first the sperm head is taken into the cell, and then the membrane toughens up and it keeps any other sperm from entering. So now we have one sperm and one nucleus of the egg, and in the next picture we can see what this looks like in a human being. This is inside a human egg, and these two little balls here are called pronuclei. And one of these is the female chromosomes, the half number.
Right.
The other is the half number of the male chromosomes of two different human beings. When these two pronuclei fuse together, two balls come together and touch, and those chromosomes coalesce, you are back up to your full complement of chromosomes, 46. That's the beginning of a new human life. There is no other stage that is comparable in being absolutely definitive. Before this, it's not a human life. And after this, it is human life.
So we know exactly when it becomes a separate human life.
Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. I think really the key here is that it says that God's eyes saw our unformed body. That means that as the body was forming in the womb, God was looking on.
Yes.
And you know, it's a kind of a terrible thought, but when a baby's aborted, I can just imagine somebody going in and just tearing that forming body out away from the very vision of God, right before his eyes. And that's why I think this is such an important issue.
When it says that God saw the unformed body, he's not just a passive observer, is he?
No, that he certainly is not.
He's active.
He's active, he's forming, he hasn't just wound up a clock and let it run. When an egg is fertilized and that egg implants in the womb, that whole step from fertilization on, if we do not interfere, baby will shortly ensue.
Yes.
You mentioned I worked for Stedman's as a consultant on microscopic terms, histology. I was with Stedman's back when they did the 26th edition in 1995, you see pictured here. Back in 1995, the dictionary said that conception was the act of conceiving or becoming pregnant, but this is the important point. Conception is the fertilization of the oocyte or ovum by a spermatozoa, a sperm cell, to form a viable or living zygote. Zygote's the name of that first cell that forms with diffusion. So, conception and fertilization, synonyms. What happened 5 years later? This is shocking. 5 years later, we got the 27th edition, and the definition was changed. Now, instead of what we had before, it starts out the same way. Conception's the act of conceiving, the implantation now of the blastocyte in the endometrium. So it's no longer fertilization conception. Now it's the cell that finally results from the zygote, this cluster of cells. Its penetration into the uterine wall is called conception. That buys several days, actually, after fertilization that you can argue that conception hasn't happened yet.
By changing the definition.
By changing the definition. And it was an arbitrary change. And that change in definition allows you to say, up to 10 days before you get complete implantation, as we'll see. And 10 days allows you then to sell the Plan B pill and argue that it will not
I was just going to ask you, is
interfere.
there political motive for this?
Yeah. Well, this is a two-cell stage, and I'll bet this is the youngest human being you've ever seen, Don. This is a human being when it's two cells. And notice the little shell out here?
Uh-huh.
This is that clear zone, that zone of pellucidity we were talking about.
Yeah.
And I mentioned that it was important. I'll tell you why. These early cells do not stick together very well. Later on in life development, you get little spot welds that hold the cells together. You get glues that hold the cells, but here they're not attached very well. If that shell breaks down, these two cells separate. And if those two cells separate, instead of getting one human being, you get two human beings.
This is where we get twins.
That's what we call an identical twin. They would be a clone. They came from the exact same genes, and yet, you know what? They'll have different fingerprints.
Yeah.
And they'll be two really different human beings.
You know, Dr. Minton, I'm just thinking of how many times during this presentation you said, if this didn't happen, or if this wasn't there, or if this didn't work this way, it would be all over. The plan, the big picture here of how God does this is absolutely amazing. And it should buoy the faith of everyone who looks at this to see God has miraculously and wonderfully made us. And I want to remind the people, these aren't drawings, these aren't artist's illustrations. You're showing us pictures from the human body of exactly how it happens under a huge microscope. Isn't that right?
Some of the pictures are actual photographs. Yeah. We have some drawings, but
yeah, mostly it's showing us what's actually happening in the human body, not an artist's rendering. And so there's no argument here.
Isn't it sad that sometimes science reduces faith when it really ought to deepen?
It really should. If you have the right worldview, it does.
It absolutely does.
Wow, they changed the meaning of a word in order to redefine conception according to their ideology. What did you see in that segment, Amanda, that really struck you?
Well, just, you know, when the egg was fertilized, the reality is that within 12 hours to 5 days, that process happens. But because of them changing their definition, it allows someone to even take that pill up to 10 days, which means that they are ending life because life had happened. So, you know, our spiritual eyes, our physical eyes need to be open to the truth, right?
You know, seeing this program and just seeing how God has done it and how He has ordained it, and, you know, how those sperm cells have to penetrate, and then once one does, you know, the wall hardens and none of the other ones can. There's just so many things that we could comment on. But Amanda, we have to stop right now because we have to take a break. Please join us for more when we come back.
We hope you're enjoying Origins TV. It all started at Cornerstone Television in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We've been producing new episodes for over 37 years now. We praise God for the success of the program and are excited to introduce you to Origins and to us. If you're interested in watching more episodes of Origins, you can find them on our YouTube page. Simply go to YouTube and search Cornerstone Television Network. Click the like and subscribe buttons, then you'll find the best episodes of Origins in our playlist. You can also visit our website at ctvn.org/origins. One more way you can stay connected with us is to subscribe to our free monthly Hope Today newsletter, which you can do from our website. And if you have any questions, call us here at Cornerstone Television at 888-665-4483. We'd love to connect with you. Thank you for watching.
From birth, I have relied on you. You brought me forth from my mother's womb. I will ever praise you. Psalm 71, verse 6.
Hello and welcome back to Created in God's Image, Part 1. Our show today has featured some segments from the Origin special, Fearfully and Wonderfully Made. It was possible with the help of Origins host emeritus, Dr. Don Chapman, and it features the late Dr. David Menton. I'm happy to be on the set with the studio host of the special, Amanda Brocker. Amanda, isn't it great to be talking about our Creator's fearfully and wonderfully making us in His image?
That's right. You know, and as you said, you know, something that just stuck out to me as well was that specific enzyme that had to be on the tip of the sperm to even get into the egg. That's miraculous. Like, it does definitely point to a divine designer, and that's God, our Creator. And knowing that there are 150 sperm that, you know, are released.
Million.
It says a million.
Yeah,
there we go.
150 million.
That's right. That's add a lot of zeros on the end. But and only about 12 get near the egg, and then for that one to get there, and then for it to harden once one gets inside. It's amazing to see God's process. But you know, that question, Ray, of when does life begin? I just feel like this needs to be settled in our hearts and for us to know. And he really talks about that human life begins when the 2, 23 and 23 join. And that literally happens within 5 days. And it's a miracle of God. Like when we think of our children and after they're born, and we're going to get into that in part 2, but this is something that God, I know, desires for us to see. And I love that he brought out the changing of definitions. When I think about that we would ever have a motive that in our world we would change definitions of words in order to promote some type of agenda. And I just feel like, Lord, have mercy on us.
You know, it's not an educational thing. It's not, we don't know, a lack of information. And it really never was. Even back in 1973, I recently did some reading that they knew that a baby's heart was beating at 8 weeks, and that you could even detect it with an instrument 6 or 7 weeks. They knew all those things. They know that the blood of the baby is not the blood of the mother, and the baby's producing it's its own organism. That's when life began, when the sperm and the egg came together. As you said, all those chromosomes. At that point, it's growth and nutrition. That's it.
Yes, and I love that, you know, he spent his life studying this to really bring us the truth of God's word concerning life. He knit us together in our mother's womb. Well, don't miss part 2 of this program featuring the final steps in the birth process with Dr. Menton.
It just goes to show we know what the Bible says is true, and the proof is all around you. If you enjoy Origins, we sure could use your help to keep this Creation television program on the air. Your support, both prayerfully and financially, make a big impact. So let's work together to show how awesome our Creator truly is. And we'll see you next time right here on Origins.
Thank you for watching this edition of Origins. For a DVD of this series, you can order online or send a $12 donation to cover shipping and handling and write to Origins Program Number 2410, Cornerstone Network, Wall, Pennsylvania, 15148.
This presentation was made possible by the faithful prayers and financial support of you, our Cornerstone family.